You're listening to the Fezcast, produced on behalf of the Saracen Supporters Association and featuring the independent thoughts, rants and rambles of Saracens fans and special guests. If you'd like your opinion to be heard on the show, you can find the Fezcast on Facebook or Fezcast_SSA on Instagram and whatever Twitter is known as these days. But for now, enjoy this week's show.
You're listening to the Fezcast.
Well, hello everybody and welcome to another edition of the Fezcast. I'm back this week, although I got a bit of the rounds of the kitchen sink last week, didn't I, Barry?
You did a little bit, not for me. I hasten to add.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, us old miserable gits got to stick together, haven't we, Barry? Let the youngsters have their moment in the sun, shall we say? But yeah, no, that was a good bit they did last week, and I'm sure Duncan will be well happy being referred to as a youngster. But yeah, we've got plenty to chat about, and for once, Barry, we're not chatting about Saracens losing, which is great, isn't it?
Yeah, excellent. It was very much a needed result. There's still some things to work on in the performance, and still some things that we could room for improvement, if you like. But the result was definitely much needed.
Indeed, yeah, and we'll discuss that in part one. Part two is a big interview this week with returning Canadian international to Saracens, Emma Taylor, which I'm really looking forward to hearing that interview, which we'll play in the middle. And then you and me can review the Rugby World Cup, and I could have a few rants, including one at Eddie Jones.
Why not? Why break the habit of a lifetime?
Absolutely. But let's get ourselves down to Kingsholm, to the Silence Kingsholm, and brilliant piece of muckhousery from Saracens hosting the shed and pointing out that it was quiet. But yeah, as you said, Barry, a much needed victory.
For 20 minutes, we didn't look very good. The scrum was an absolute mess. I think the first 5 or 6 scrums went something like free kick against us, which then turned into a penalty on the reset, which gave them 3-0. We then had Willis picking one up whilst reversing a rate of knots you don't normally associate with a human being. The next one was another free kick, I think, and then it was another penalty. It seemed a mess. And for 20 minutes, we weren't in the game. And I was sitting there surrounded by Gloucester fans thinking, oh, God, this is going to get embarrassing. And where's the bar? But then we managed to get a toehold in the game, and a great piece of skill by Alex Lewington a great piece of soccer skill, I should say, by Alex Lewington to hack it onto himself twice, and a slightly fortunate bounce, and we were ahead at half time.
Well, I mean, I suppose on small moments do things change, and we see that in every game of rugby you've ever watched. I mean, you know, and I suppose the point that we have been making over the last couple of weeks is that we seem to have gone in slightly undercooked. We seem to have gone in slightly unprepared, shall we say. 2 very tough games, an absolute shellacking from Exeter, which actually on Exeter's result on the weekend doesn't seem actually that unusual. I mean, Sam still sat there saying that Exeter will come last. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the way it's going at the moment, they could well be challengers at the end of the season. You know, to put 43 points on Sale Sharks is quite impressive. But then we saw an improvement, albeit in a defeat, the following week, and now we're stepped up again. The question I've got to ask is, you know, is it because Saracens have actually improved, or are Gloucester really, you're looking at Gloucester thinking, you know, 2 seasons ago they looked really, really good. Now they look like bottom fodder again.
Yeah, there was a couple of things there. Chatting to some Gloucester fans around the game, they are not very happy with George Givington. Certainly, the ones I spoke to, they're complaining about too much rotation, too many changes, and not necessarily picking either the strongest side that's available for a match, or even a consistent side, so that combinations get to work with each other. As I say, Gloucester were pretty good for 20 minutes and had a try correctly chalked off from Mercer as he dropped the thing as he went over the line. But for that, it could have been a different story. We could have found ourselves a way behind and struggling. But for all the problems we had at scrum time, we were very good in the line out. Andy Christie makes such a difference to that line out for me. I think he's such a competitor in the line out, and he jumps far higher than you'd imagine. He's aggressive and he attacks the ball and wins it back. Gloucester were pretty in patterns, that they pulled some, that they did some nice passing around in the midfield, but they had no real bite, which was slightly surprising. Perhaps they were missing Reece Samet. I don't know. They didn't have any out and out pace on the wings. It was a combination of a few things, I suspect. Saracens they grew during the match as well. I mean, having got into halftime in front, as it were, they got better in the second half and kept Gloucester at arm's length relatively straightforwardly in the end, and I think it was a deserved result. But a few things to work on. But Gloucester were not particularly good on the night, apart from that first 20 minutes when they looked like they could tear us apart.
But they didn't tear us apart, which I suppose is good for Saracens, in so much as that you've had your pants pulled down and your bottom slapped by Exeter in a defensive performance that was well below what you'd expect of Saracens. And they've stepped up again now and put a defensive performance in, which we know and we can say from the Rugby World Cup, and we'll discuss that in part 3 when I have a rant about the World Cup final. Defences do win matches, and if you could stop momentum in attack from the opposite team and then take your chances, which obviously Saracens did, all good. The other thing he did mention there, of course, is the players that are missing. We've seen Gloucester's normal standoff was playing against us in Paris for Argentina. We're still missing player after player after player, and watching that third, fourth playoff, which I'm sure you've watched on catch up, Barry, because this is the next thing I'm going to point out after that. But you looked at some players from a Saracens point of view. Owen Farrell in particular, he looked like he was playing on fumes at the end of the game. Still brilliantly, still did well, but he was on fumes. Ben Earl has got every right to be running on empty, although I think he's like the Duracell body. He can just keep going and going and going. But just starting we've got less teams. Why they couldn't wait to the end of the World Cup to start the Premiership, I don't know. And then, okay, you got to play games some point, and who expected England to get into a bronze medal playoff, but to then have a big Premiership game kicking off quarter an hour before England played against Argentina. One, your crowd's going to be a lot less, so contributed to the quietness of the shed maybe. And I just no conjoined thinking, I don't think, goes into this scheduling.
No, I suspect the scheduling of our visit to Gloucester was probably to try and avoid a clash with the World Cup final. And as you say, no one expected England to be in the bronze medal game, the game that no one wants to play in. Had it been two other countries, any other countries involved, it probably wouldn't have made much of a difference to the attendance at Kingsholm. I've got to say though, Kingsholm's a frightfully expensive stadium to visit. I paid quite a lot of money to sit behind the posts, far more than I would pay at Saracens, which was a bit of a surprise. But it was a subdued crowd, and had a lot to do with the result. I suspect it would have been different had they kicked on from those first 20 minutes. But it does seem odd that we have to clash with it. I suspect the answer lies in the fact that they're trying to avoid clashing in the Six Nations. I think from what Lucy said on the podcast to us before at the end of last season, I think that's what's behind it. And I think with a reduced number of sides in the Premiership next year, obviously we won't have a clash with either the autumn internationals or the Six Nations, I think, from what we've been told.
Well, hopefully not. I mean, yeah, let's see how that one plays out. Of course, Saracens men was not the only good result on the weekend. Saracens women won, England women won, and obviously England men won. We are not going to discuss the Saracens women game or the England women game because coming up now, we have Matt talking with Emma Taylor. So, Barry, we'll take a back seat for a little while.
You're listening to the Fezcast.
You're listening to the Fezcast, which is proudly sponsored by the Saracens Supporters Association, and I'm Alison Davis, one of the SSA committee. For a £10 annual subscription, the SSA provides our members with monthly newsletters, virtual and in-person player events, away match ticket allocations, and we organise pre-match gatherings at away matches. We sponsor men's and women's players, and we support the Saracens Foundation Track Club on behalf of our members. On top of all that, every year we have a seasonal SSA badge, which is exclusive to members. Where else can you get that much value for a tenner? Join now at membermojo.co.uk/SSA, or come and see us on match day in the Oasis at the Stonex.
This is the Fezcast.
Very happy to be joined by Emma Taylor, who's returned to Saracens for a second spell after joining the club in 2021 at the height of COVID. So we probably didn't see as much of Emma as we really wanted to as fans. But yeah, delighted that she's joined the club again for this season. How are you doing, Emma? You okay?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks for having me. Definitely a nicer time to be in London than last time I was here, so I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, I mean, just sort of tell us a little bit about what that was like. I mean, obviously, you've been over on this side of the Atlantic previously in Ireland, but joining a new club when everyone's in lockdown and there's not a lot of socialising to happen. How difficult was it, sort of stepping into a new team like that?
Yeah, it was like I think the only way to describe it was like it was a bit strange, like just a very obviously unique time in everyone's lives. But when we came over, like I came over with Alicia Corrigan. Sophie had already been over here, and I think about like 3 or 4 days after we had landed, we were isolating, and we found out the league had been actually postponed for about 2 weeks. So I remember just, during that isolation, having the thoughts being like, am I even going to get to play? Like, did I just fly over here for no reason, really? So yeah, it was definitely just like, everywhere, like everyone was kind of living with uncertainty and what have you. But, yeah, I mean, I think the strangest thing from an athlete's perspective was, obviously we had like the masks at training, and it was very much like a post game, you took your food and go, like you don't hang out after. And one thing with rugby obviously is the kind of friendships, relationships and whatever. So I feel like that kind of suffered a bit because you don't really have as many opportunities to get to know your teammates. So that was definitely different like this time around. But yeah, the no fans during the games was also very strange. I remember our first when things opened up and people were allowed to do like outdoor activities. It was our semi-final against Loughborough at home, and there were so many fans there. Like we were all like overwhelmed. Like it was so noisy, and we hadn't played with noise all season. So even just like the line out calls, like we're like having to scream everything because we were just used to be able to hear like a pin drop for the other game. So, but yeah, it's way different this time. So that's a good thing, I think.
That's good. I mean, I was at that Loughborough game, and I actually remember feeling a bit overwhelmed myself, to be honest, sitting in the stands surrounded by so many people, because it was pretty much the first time that I'd basically been out of the house for 6 months. So
I know.
Yeah,
I'd say everyone was feeling that way.
Absolutely, yeah. But I mean, it's very good to have you back again. Obviously, feel maybe there's some unfinished business or getting the better experience of being in a club now. Things are relatively normal. What was the sort of decision process for coming back to Saracens for you?
That's A good question. I feel like, you know, unfinished business is like, I feel like my mantra at the moment, for all things rugby. I think, I left when we left series. We lost a bit of a heartbreaker to Quins in the final. And then I went back home for some international duties with Canada, and then went to the World Cup last year in New Zealand. And that again was, I wasn't sure if that was going to be like my last dance in terms of playing like competitively, so Prem and international. And um, I left the pitch. We were playing against France in the bronze medal game. And I left the pitch about 2 minutes left in the game. I dislocated my wrist, like a very bizarre injury. So, at that point in time, I had like surgeons and doctors being like, "We've never seen this before. Your wrist is going to be like really strange, in terms of like how we're going to manage this for recovery." So, long story short, it was kind of not a last minute, but it was, a decision I made. I tend to like lean on my parents for stuff like this still, and 30 years old at the time and still asking my parents, what they would do. But yeah, I think I was like, you know what, the way like my rugby has kind of ended at that point in time, like at the World Cup, and, individually, I didn't like reach the goals I had set for myself and for my team. I know our national like, Canadian team, we hadn't reached met the goals that we had set as a team. So I just thought like it would almost like wouldn't sit well with me later down the road to leave like that. So, kind of part one of getting ready for international duty and, being the best rugby player you can be is playing the best rugby that you can. And I don't think anyone would argue that, the best league for women's rugby right now is the Prem. So it was a bit of a no-brainer in terms of like where I would go to play. And then I'm fiercely loyal, so Sarah, I honestly didn't talk to anybody else. Like I would say that hand on heart, not that that matters, but yeah, I just kind of always kept in touch with Alex Osterberry. So yeah, I reached out and we kind of set it up, and it was an easy decision for me, really. A lot of other people would message Sophie about me, be like, oh, and like the two of you, the blah, blah, and I was like, you know what, I can also make my own decisions. But anyways, I did really like that about Alex. But yes,
I'm sure it does factor into decisions sometimes if both of you are moving in the same direction. But
definitely, I mean, like even a lot of our team has played over in the Prem in the last few years, and I feel like everyone just wants to have one or two teammates, you know what I mean, at the same club. So it is common to like almost recruit in like pairs, whether it be partners or friendships, or like, Dalika Menon and Emily Totosi, like those two, like I don't know if they'll ever separate. Like they're just a package deal. They're best friends. So, but yeah, I really liked it. So.
But I mean, we talk about Canada and international rugby. Obviously, you have played more internationals since the World Cup, but not playing in the. I say this every time. I can never work out whether I'm supposed to say WXV or W15. To be honest, no one's ever told me. But
WXV, yeah,
that's where I'm going anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, is there any sort of disappointment that you're not involved in that tournament at the moment, or the fact that you played a few games post World Cup as well when you maybe didn't expect to? Has that benefited at all? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I came back for kind of had like a tour in Spain in spring where we started off our Pac 4, so that's when we played the US. And we played against South Africa as well. So I came back for that way earlier than anticipated. So I got to play in those games. And then we had our Pac 4 tournament against New Zealand and Australia in Ottawa this summer, and I was involved in that. So, that was actually the first time I'd faced New Zealand, because I didn't get to play against them the year before in Pac 4. So that was the first time I had gotten to play against New Zealand myself since my first cap years and years ago. So that was kind of cool. Obviously, results didn't go our way. I feel like a I get asked this question like once every few days, honestly, about like not being involved in the fall internationals and whatever. And like, there really isn't an answer. Like, am I disappointed? Of course. Like, I'm a competitor, I'm a fierce competitor. And, I always want to be the best and play with the best. And to me, like, international playing for your country is like the cream of the crop, right? Like, that's why all of us do what we're doing. For the people who want that, not everybody plays to play for their country, but that's, those are my goals. Um, and, coaches, like, obviously I've spoke with coaching staff and, they kind of say like, don't take it personally. I always take it personally because that's what fuels me, I guess. But there's just a lot that goes into selection with Canada that obviously I won't go into detail, but it's just a lot about like who's playing where. And I think at the end of the day, like they looked at my situation and said, if we don't select Emma, how bad? She's at series in a daily training environment, playing with one of the best teams in the league, playing 80 minutes. Like I've played 3 games at 80 minutes. Like I haven't played 80 minutes in years, so it hurts. But it's fun. So, I mean, like I said, there's a lot that goes into it more than like a lot of people think it's just who's your best 30 players in the country, pick them. Like, no, we're 2 years out from a World Cup. You have to develop players, but you also need a core group to help lead. And that's just the way, I guess, professional sport works, is just the odds aren't always in your favor. But yeah, so long-winded answer of yes, disappointed, but have I moved on? Yes. Am I known to hold a grudge? Sort of, but no, I'm just kidding. It's been all jokes aside, it's been so nice just to get settled in and like actually know what's going on with like everything at series. And I feel like I've had a bit of a leadership role there as well with a lot of the internationals gone. So it's been a very, very like pleasant runner up, if you will, as harsh as that even sounds, but it's been fun. So
no, that's absolutely fair. And I hate asking those sorts of questions, honestly. So thank you for
people ask me completely like I was anticipating it, don't worry. But people ask me all the time, like even get those Instagram messages from people who you haven't talked to in years, and they'll just send you the lineup and be like, where are you? Why aren't you involved? And I'm just like, mind your business. Just kidding. I would never respond to someone like that, but I'm usually just like, yeah, I wasn't selected, So I've just for whatever reason over the last, because it is to be fair to Rugby Canada fans, it is the first time I think since 2019 that I haven't been involved in a tour. So I think my friends and family are just kind of used to seeing me away with the national team. So good. It's a good question. It's fair. It doesn't bother me.
I do appreciate it, and yeah, it looks a very strong squad, and yeah, obviously there's plenty still to come from it. But like I said, there is potentially the bigger picture. Like you say, you're part of a very strong Saracen squad, even with players missing on international duty, and yeah, surely there is only a benefit from that. So onto the cup games themselves, like you say, you've played a huge part in those, and like I said at the start, I have to admit that I've seen the results on paper and 5-minute highlight packages and very little else, to be honest, but you do feature quite heavily in those highlights packages, so it seems like it's going pretty well in the cup for yourself individually. But what's how do you feel about it in the first few games of being at Saracens again?
I feel like I honestly kind of felt like I had a bit of a slow burn. Like I say that, and I said to actually I was speaking to Alicia Corrigan about it, because I was like, I don't think I've had my best game the first 3 games, and she kind of laughed. Like she was like, Emma, it took me the first half of the season to settle in. Like, it's not, so I was giving myself a bit of grace, because you're like, I guess the way you can explain it to people who like, you're trying to settle into like a team's culture, system, environment, learn all the like everything. But then like every player obviously has their own edge, and I have my own X factor that makes me like different. And so you're trying to like, obviously you want to display that, and you want to bring that like individual brilliance or whatever it is that makes you stand out. But like you also, priority one always has to be the team, right? So like goal number 1 is like, for me, it was like settling in, making sure I'm doing a job, doing what like, you know, my coaches expect from me and what my teammates need from me. And then, you know, this past weekend was probably one of the better games probably the best game I've played since we got here against Gloucester. So I'm working my way to where I want to be like individually. So I'm happy about that. I would be more concerned if I was going the other way. Um, so like, yeah, so happy with myself, kind of how I've settled in. I feel like, you know, the girls have been like so great with at training, like on every kind of level in terms of being like um just strong competitors, pushing like me and each other. And then also just like allowing me to, you know, get comfortable within the role. Like I said, I kind of had to hop in not into like a captaincy thing or anything, but obviously a bit of a leadership role in the line out and kind of just the forwards in general. You know, we didn't have May Campbell or Poppy Cleo for the first two games of the cup either. So those are two people who we've been really lucky to have back the last two games. But so yeah, it's kind of like, you know, you're thrown right into it and kind of like, hey, we need Jeff, let's go. So but yeah, like it's been very fun rugby, you know?
Good. Well, I'm glad to
Yeah.
hear. And you kind of touched on it there, but there's around you, there's some of the players that have just come out of the academy system, and you know that's their first experience of first team rugby at Saracens. You have been there before, but you've also got plenty of international experiences, and so taking on a leadership role in some ways is quite big and a huge thing to do when you're first rejoining a club, I suppose. But have you been comfortable with that side of being part of the squad, or is it something you've not really done before? Or?
Yeah, like I would be comfortable enough with it. I'm not like as I wouldn't call myself like I don't know if I'm like very much like a verbal leader. Like I generally just like to I don't know, like point things out like as they come up, or if there's something that's more of like a theme across training, then I'm like, oh, we need to like address this. But you know, I'm kind of happy just to sit back and you know, we have Leanne and Fante and like May and Poppy. Like I'm very happy to let them kind of take the reins. Sarah McKenna. Um, so yeah, but like when it comes to anything like kind of forward related, or if the coaches are like, hey, it'd be nice if you could do like this, kind of focus on this today or talk about this, you know, in the meeting, then I'm definitely happy to do that. But yeah, it's been, like I said, like different, but definitely something I'm comfortable with. Like, yeah.
No, it's good. I mean, I'm sure both Leanne and Poppy won't mind me saying that if you're going to try and out-vocalise those two, then you're probably not really going to win, are you?
Yeah, you said it, not me. So
yes, and I'm saying it from behind the screen as well, not to their faces.
Yeah. Oh, can't wait for them to hear that. They're gonna love it.
But yeah, the cup fixtures in general, obviously 3 wins out of 4 and finishing top of the pool. Has it been? Was that the target really, or do you even set a targets for the cup fixtures or any fixtures in general?
Yeah, I think with the cup, like what you have to kind of work, like the team has to be more, I guess, like process focused and not just outcome focused. Like I think if you're looking at like pure outcome focused results, you know, you'd want to win minimum 3 to 4, preferably all 4. But our thing was like coaches being like, okay, great, we won this game, but holy mackerel, we had terrible like discipline, you know, so we need to focus on that. Like, I don't care if you guys won the game, you got way too many penalties in this area. So I think for like the kind of aim, well, from my eyes anyways, the aim of the cup is like to basically set yourself up on like have a good platform and a baseline for like heading into the league, and not just like letting everyone go rogue and try to do everything individually just to win a game, if that makes sense. It's also like, sure, it's an individual showcase as well for, like you said, those players that are coming up from the academy or players that might not get as much game time when people return from international duties. So there's that element where you just want people like, there's like teammates who I just want to them to like kick on so badly. Like, you know what I mean? You just want people to do well. But yeah, it's just making sure that like everything that the team has gone through in preseason, I'm reminded that I wasn't there for preseason. So, but I know that they did have a pretty rough one. So yeah, and then obviously over the last kind of 2 months of training, just making sure that what we've been working on, we're like, you know, moving upward, and not just getting by and getting through games with wins based on like individual performances and having like strong athletes and whatever. So yeah, I think we're happy. Like I think two out of those 4 games, we made the ending of the game really hard for ourselves. Like when we played Loughborough, we were playing goal line defense for the last like 6 minutes, I think, of the game. Like literally tackle after tackle after tackle, and I was in like, you know, 78th minute. I was like, oh my god, like I don't know if I can do this. And then obviously this Gloucester game this past weekend, I think we were up 31-12 at one point, and it ended up being a 7-pointer in the end. So yeah, I think like I said, we'd want to look back kind of in our last maybe like game management towards the end, but you know, coach and staff are probably like, you know, they're laughing because they're probably like, you know, we have some areas now that we know we need to focus on and things we need to kind of improve on, and we also got the win. So it's just, you know, gives them things to focus on for training and also gave us the outcome that we like worked hard for. So
that's good. I mean, moving on to the league season, there's no point in me asking what the team's target is for the season because surely it's to be champions again. There's not really any way around that. So for you personally, do you sort of set yourself any kind of goal for the season, or is it just that sort of constant improvement and learning and developing as a player even now?
yeah, I think like kind of a bit of everything like that you just said. Like I want to, you know, ideally your best game this season is going to be in the Prem like final, you know. I like big games. Like I play the best against better teams. It's just the way I am. I don't know if it means some people are like, oh, it just means that you're like mentally tough. You can hype yourself up for big games. I'm like, or the opposite. And when we play kind of like teams on the lower end, I'm kind of like, I'll just flath around. So I think for me, like I want to be consistent throughout the season. I know, you know, in my position, second row, back row, we have like a lot of phenomenal athletes, you know, people coming back from England duties, Wales duties, Scotland, Ireland. So it's definitely going to be a full house in the back 5. But I think like it's exciting if you're looking at it if you kind of take out the individual element of it, you know, you look at it from a team's perspective. Like I don't think there's a lineup you could put almost 2 full packs against each other with 8, you know, a starting team on one side and then like a reserves on the other side. And I think they would be very, very equal. Like I don't think there's like an out and out kind of starting 15. So I think from Alex's like perspective, he's probably excited that, you know, we have a full season to try out like different combinations and kind of see who works well with whom and whatever. For myself, like obviously I'll always compete for a spot. And where that spot is, if it's, you know, 4 or 5, or if it's 19, 20, like, or if it's, you know, in the stands, usually know there's like a reason for selection. I'm kind of used to everything at this point. But yeah, I just think like all you can do is just want to make sure that I'm coming out like every training session and like showing my best and being my best and like pushing people to be, you know, their best. We're all there so that we can, you know, improve and grow. And yeah, so I guess helping each other by you know, pushing. And I think one thing that when I coach back home that I try to teach the girls that I coach is like, I know you're all playing with your best friends, but when you're at training, like I won't let any like best friends do tackle drills together. I make them separate because I'm like, you guys won't hit each other hard. they're just like, because they're giggling, they're like, oh, I don't want to hurt her. And I'm like, well, you're not going to hurt her. I'm like, and you guys can talk about it after training. But at training, this is like, you're trying to push each other, make each other better. So yeah, I'd say that's probably my goals, and obviously knock on wood, just to stay healthy and have a good time. I'm at the point in my life I'm serious, but I still want to have fun, right? Like, can't all be business.
That seems fair to me. Now, that was going to be my last question, but I've got one more, just off the back of what you said there. You talk about you don't let best friends tackle each other in training. I can imagine that the likes of yourself and Sophie are that competitive that actually it works exactly the opposite for you two in training. Would you go a little bit harder on each other necessarily, or?
Yes. So if we're like, it's funny that I say that, because whenever we do like one-on-one tackling, or if we warm up or whatever, I always go with Sophie. And I think it's also because she knows like what type of tackles I need to make before a game to get ready, and vice versa. But yeah, like if we're in a game, like we always have this like thing, like if she's coming at me, I'm trying to smash her, and the other way around, she's trying to step me, and everything goes. But yeah, there is not one thing we do not compete over. It is probably like, from an outsider perspective, if you knew some of the things that like we compete over, you'd be like, you are both nuts. But yeah, we're pretty good. We don't usually get like nothing after we leave the field. It's usually all right. So that's I'm happy about that, because that would make for a long ride home and a long weekend, if every training session something happened. But yeah, so I'm lucky in that element. But you are right, that is definitely a case of where it's actually good to be paired up, because I feel like you get fired up,
Yeah. I knew it.
Yeah, I know. I feel like a lot of people would say that about us as well. They're probably like, you two should not go in a group together. But so far we've knock on wood against, but so far neither of us have injured each other before. So there you go.
Probably the main thing. But
yeah.
This has been great, Emma. I really appreciate it. And good luck for the rest of the season. I hope to see you plenty of times at the ground. It'd be nice for you to have an attendance at the ground every week, rather than the ghost town of a few years ago. So good luck for the rest of the season, and thank you very much for joining us on the Fezcast. I'll hopefully see you at a few games soon.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, we'll see you soon. Go Series.
You're listening to the Fezcast.
Hi, Alex Osterberry here, Director of Rugby for Saracens Women. You're listening to the Saracens Fezcast.
This is the Fezcast.
Fantastic interview, as ever, from Matt there with the brilliant Emma Taylor. Really fascinating stuff there. And yeah, interesting point just coming out of that. And Rocky Clark, former Saracen and now coach at Leicester, and Stella Mills have pointed out, when everyone was talking about Ben Young's 127 caps, most capped England player. No, most caps England men's player. And likewise, South Africa are not the first team to win 4 World Cups. They're the first men's team to win 4 World Cups. And that's an important distinction to make, because if we are determined and want to ensure that the women's game is given the relevant exposure it needs, we need to be aware of these situations, don't we, Barry?
Yeah, it's an understandable mistake, because it's kind of the mindset that we've always been in. But you're right. Now that the women's game is deservedly on an equal footing, then we do need to bear in mind these things. And we're talking about records; they do cross across both sides.
Indeed. But let's talk about men's international rugby. First of all, I'm going to do this very quickly. Eddie Jones has resigned as Australian coach. Hell's surprise. Presumably, he probably negotiated himself a payoff. Is there anybody now in the world of rugby who doesn't realise what a boorish oik that bloke is? Apart from Japan, obviously, you're obviously going to throw him a few quids.
Well, yeah, that's a strange thing. I always thought the Japanese were well known for their their respect of integrity and honesty and other core values that we associate with rugby. And when you look at what's been going on over in Australia over the last few weeks, as Eddie Jones has had an interview, then denied he's had an interview, then said he's there for the long term, and has now, as we say, resigned. The man's got no integrity left, and he can't need a few more quid, surely. So I just don't get it. But perhaps there'll be more will come out by the time we go to air.
Well, maybe so. I mean, yeah, it's incredulous that he is still thought of as having this high reputation. You only have to look at how badly he coached Australia at this World Cup. Then coming out this week and saying, I didn't take Hooper and Cooper because, they're not the right. If Hooper and Cooper had played for Australia in this tournament, they'd have got out of the group stages. No two ways about it, even with Eddie Jones as their coach. And you only have to look at the improvement that Steve Borthwick has put into England, because if Eddie Jones had been coaching England, we wouldn't have got out the group stages. And with Steve Borthwick, he's managed to turn around an omni shambles that Jones left and done well. But again, we'll talk about that a bit later on. Before we talk about the final, we do have to talk about the big controversy that came out of the semi-final, England versus South Africa, and the way that it has been dealt with. And I've had a few to and fro's on Twitter with the guys from Rugby Sale Sharks, and they're absolutely incandescent with the way that Tom Curry has been dealt with, and the way that his complaints, whether the complaint is right or wrong, it's not been dealt with in the right way. And I think there's an element, the World Rugby have brushed this under the carpet because they didn't want their showpiece final spoiled. And that's wrong, because it's whether he said what he said, there was enough confusion there that Tom Curry obviously felt, and not for the first time, that he was being abused. Now, there's a couple of things I'm going to point out here. First of all, everybody's saying, well, why didn't he mention the one in November 2022? Why has it all come out now? Well, I think he probably heard it in November 2022 and went, am I sure that's what he said? Only for it to happen again and him to go, well, obviously he is. And the second thing, what I hate more than anything else in the game of rugby, or any sport, is this idea that sledging and banter and abuse and everything is some way part of the game, and it's all part of winding up the opposition to get an advantage and everything like that.
World Rugby have massively screwed this up. The fact they tried to open an investigation, then said, well, actually, there's no proof, and then there's no evidence, and there isn't enough evidence. They've blown the whole thing out of proportion. And some of the comments that I've seen on social media, and I've seen you replying to them, not so much from the South Sharks boys, I've got to say, have been absolutely disgraceful, and it's soured the World Cup, and I think it does. Sometimes the behaviour that goes on around the side makes South Africa a hard team to love, if you like, and we're saying that the morning after they've just been crowned world champions for the fourth time, and it's a shame because it takes away. I think it takes away from their achievements, and yeah, World Rugby have massively screwed this whole week up.
Oh, absolutely, and I think there's an element as well that it's South Africa, so any other team would have got away with that. But because it's South Africa, for some reason they're held up in this mystical, because of their country situation, because of the political situation, whatever. They get an awful lot more leeway than a lot of other teams do get, I think, Barry.
Yeah, they probably do. I mean, I from what I can gather of the explanations that I've seen, it's obviously that it's fairly obvious that Tom Curry's heard it, and it's fairly obvious what it means now. And it's also fairly obvious how it could be misconstrued as something else. But to expect Tom Curry to know Afrikaans because he plays for Sale, which was one suggestion I've seen on social media, was quite frankly bizarre.
I think Bongi will be under the microscope now, and the next time South Africa play England, the best thing England will, as much as I said I hate it, is they will wind South Africa up in the hope that something else gets said, and it's just a sad state of affairs. World Rugby though as well, really, they've not impressed me at all this week, and I know I follow Daniel Leo on Twitter, and he's pretty much incandescent, not only with World Rugby, but also with the Samoan voters who voted with the new structure of, is paying lip service, isn't it, to tier 2 nations? Like, yeah, oh yeah, we'll give you this new competition, but you can't get promoted for another 6.5 years. It's, I mean, it's ridiculous. I really don't. Me personally, Bill Beaumont, great captain in his day, 40 odd years ago, being a great rugby man. I have no problem with that at all and everything. But can we just hand over World Rugby to Gus Pichot and Simon Raoului and just let them get on with it?
It would certainly be a breath of fresh air. We've always complained in this country, Will Carling most famously so, about the old farts brigade that run the game, and it just seems to be expanding that way into the world game as well. And it's a shame. I don't know how you bridge the gap between tier 1 and so-called tier 2, throwing them out. Throwing the likes of Namibia in front of New Zealand and watching them lose 87-0 or something every week isn't really going to help them a great deal either. And how you bridge that gap, I genuinely don't know. But you're right, it does seem bizarre that you can't get promoted for 6 years.
Yeah, I mean, my answer to it is that I think that they should take a leaf out of football's book. And you've got 4 distinct regions throughout the world. You've got the Asian Pacific nations, you've got the Americas, North and South America, Canada, USA, Uruguay, Chile, Argentina. You've got Europe, you've got Africa. Why not have a competition every 4 years in the fallow years between World Cup cycles that then goes towards ranking, so it perhaps takes out the issues when it comes to World Cup draws and everything like that. And you have a competition like you have the Euros or the Copa Americana or the Africa's Cup once every 4 years in between World Cups. England and France wouldn't probably send their first full strength side. They would use it as a development of the B players. So you'd probably see someone like Bernal maybe captaining the team with a few younger players that are coming through, give Harry Arundel more of an opportunity, whatever it may be. But then that gives those clubs exposure to it. That needs to be qualified for. And it may well mean that you have to get rid of the Six Nations and you might have to get rid of the Rugby Championship or something along those lines because of the amount of rugby that's being played. But, there's a few turkeys have voted for Christmas, particularly Samoan ones. Yeah, it's going to accept... It's going to take a radical plan if you really want to go out a game of rugby.
Yeah, it's an interesting shout. I'm not too sure about getting rid of the Six Nations and the Rugby Championship, though. I mean, speaking purely personally, that's always the thing I look forward to as towards the end of winter, we're finally coming out of hibernation. We've done dry January. It's the first weekend in February, and it's the Six Nations, and that for me is a massive part of my rugby calendar, if you like, whether I'm going or not. And as it happens this year, I'm not. But it's always a great tournament, and it always seems to mean an awful lot to the supporters of the nations involved in it. And I get that in the wider picture, it might not be that popular a tournament, particularly amongst the so-called tier 2 nations. But for us, it's a massive thing, and I'd hate to see that go. But on the subject of World Cups and draws and what have you, here's a radical idea. Stick the qualifiers' names in a bag and draw them out one by one, and we'll have a free and open draw. We won't have any seedings. We won't have any region protection. You can't play this and you can't play them in the next round and what have you. Let's just stick all the names in a bag and draw them out, and that's the fairest way to do it, I think.
Well, quite possibly. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's a really difficult thing. I mean, at the end of the day, World Rugby probably got the final. If France couldn't be in the final, they got the final they wanted last night. And, you want the biggest teams in the final. You want to give the opportunity to other teams to progress, to show off, whatever. But at the end of the day, if you're putting out something on primetime TV at 8 o'clock at night in Europe, where the biggest market is, you want that to be the 2 best teams. Which brings me on to the final, that though we might have had the 2 best teams, And I'm getting a lot of grief here because on Twitter or whatever, because people are saying it was an epic final, it was a great final. It wasn't. It was an awful final. And let's just break it down. Quite simply, New Zealand couldn't string 3 phases of play together in attack and couldn't win an attacking line-out past the first jumper for Toffee. South Africa, despite playing against 14 men for virtually the entire game, scored 4 penalties in the first 30 minutes, and then spent the rest of the game trying to get themselves into position to drop goals that they then singly failed to do with any skill whatsoever. And I will add this to it because I'm going to invoke the rugby version of Godwin's law, which is when, if you're ever having an historical political argument, the first person who mentions Adolf Hitler loses the argument. The Godwin level there is Owen Farrell. And if England had played that final and won that final in exactly the same way as South Africa had won it last night, every pundit in the world would have been turning around and saying you need to put an asterisk against that because they didn't deserve to win it.
Yeah, it was about 20, 25 minutes in. I was sitting there watching them kick the ball from one end, from 122 to the other, backwards and forwards, and the forwards were standing still. And I was thinking, God, you know what? If England were playing this game, we'd be getting slated for playing like this. There wasn't a great deal of ambition. I guess it comes with the territory. It's a fear of making a mistake more than the chance to go and make a name for yourself. I didn't think it was that bad a final. It was certainly absorbing and gripping all the way to the end. New Zealand could well have won that, and probably will be disappointed that they didn't. A couple of kicks went astray, and they took. There was one in the second half where they actually had a quite kickable penalty, and they decided to go to the corner. Had they kicked that penalty, they'd have probably won the game. So they'll be disappointed. South Africa weren't quite the side that we saw, but you've got to give them some sort of credit. They won all their knockout games by 1 single point each, and that takes some heart.
It does. I would have loved to have played in that game, but if I was a first-time watcher of rugby, turning on ITV1 at 8:00 on Saturday night to watch that game, I think I've been watching Strictly by the end of the first half.
Yeah, for someone new to the game, it wasn't the best advert for the game. For those of us who know and love the game, it was absorbing. It wasn't as bad. I mean, the one 4 years ago, frankly, was a worse final because that wasn't really competitive. Yeah. If you think about it, and just to go back on one thing that you said earlier about World Rugby getting the final that they wanted, by the time 2027 rolls round, those two nations who played in the last final would have held the trophy every year since 2007.
Yeah. Yeah, and here's another thing. When you talk about putting asterisks against teams' World Cups, South Africa might have won 4, but 2 of those at least, maybe 3, should have an asterisk next to them because they weren't the best team in any of those finals. In 1995, most of the Kiwi team were run off to the side because they were suffering from food poisoning. 2007, Mark Cueto's perfectly good try, was knocked off. And last night, quite honestly, they lucked one there. And I mean, fair dues, yeah. You make your own luck, and they stuck in it, and they did what they had to do. I think what it was a case of last night, and you're right, in a lot of finals, Barry, it's not so much people winning games as people not losing games. And last night, I think the All Blacks, and it's something that Matt has taken issue with me over when I spoke about Ireland and France choking. And indeed, I think there's an element that England slightly choked against South Africa in a game that they should have won, only to make a wrong decision at the wrong time. And likewise, the All Blacks, there's an element of the pressure got to them last night, and they lost the game as opposed to South Africa, like they did the previous World Cup against England, where they just came out and destroyed England. South Africa didn't make the level of mistakes that, and it was senior players in New Zealand making those mistakes. Beauden Barrett had an absolute, other than his try, had an absolute shocker, I thought. Richie Mo'unga, even worse. I mean, he had an absolutely abysmal game. Brodie Retallick just couldn't get that line out working, and yet he's one of the best line out operators out there. I honestly sit there now, and I will say that on that pitch, I think there were probably 4 players that came out with any real credit from that, and played at a level of respect. Mark Talea for the Kiwis did. Jesse Creel, who was an absolute brick wall in defence, did for South Africa, and I think Peter Steph de Toit was the man of the match without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, I think I would also throw in Aaron Smith on his last New Zealand. I'm not sure if it's his last New Zealand game or whether it's his last game in general. But I thought he played his heart out and put them in the right positions as often as he could. And he was just unfortunate that some of his colleagues couldn't hold on to what was obviously going to be a greasy ball to hold on to. But it was a shame. But yeah, it wasn't the best. It wasn't the best of finals, and perhaps the best side didn't win. But that's the way it goes sometimes.
What you can say is, Barry, that I think, particularly if you're Irish or French fans, that you're sat there looking at that being an absolutely gigantic missed opportunity that they went out in the quarterfinal stages. Because I think both France and Ireland would have had the making of that game last night.
Yeah, I think they probably would. I pre-tournament, I picked France to win it. I think you picked Ireland, if I remember correctly.
Well, I went South Africa, actually.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I said I can't see past South Africa, which was in the immediate aftermath of the Twickenham game against the All Blacks.
Oh, right. Okay, fair enough. We'll have to have a listen back and check that one. I'm not too sure. But yeah, it was it was a shame because either of those sides would have probably turned up and given us a better game. That was probably France-Ireland was probably the final that we were expecting, I guess.
Yeah. I actually think England, the way that England have improved, would have actually done quite well last night in that kind of arm wrestle kind of situation. But mention England. Shall we get on and mention England in the third and fourth playoff? And in particular, there was an awful lot of Saracens players on show in that game. Start with the 2 Argentinian lads who are coming to us. I think they've had a pretty fabulous tournament, the pair of them too.
Yeah, I wasn't convinced we needed another back rower, but yeah, let's get them in and see what they can do. They'll find the Premiership a different kettle of fish to what they're used to, and they'll probably find the weather in Barnet in January not very enjoyable either. But looking forward to seeing what they can contribute to the side.
Well, yeah, and so shall we look at the England team then and look at pluses and negatives from a Saracens point of view? And you said, I'm not sure that we needed another back row, but Billy Vunipola comes out this tournament with little or no credit at all, does he? He's been on the bench, he's come off and yet not really imposed himself on games, taken quite a fair amount of criticism. He's been seen a club teammate who doesn't play number 8 picked ahead of him at number 8. I think that's got to be the end of Billy's international career, I think. And potentially it's a big knockoff on his market value going forward, as contracts come up. And I think he's only on a year contract now, isn't he, Barry?
My suspicion is that we'll see 2 of the Vunipolas at least depart from Saracens at the end of this season, assuming that the information we have on contracts is correct. And they will probably end up somewhere like Japan where they can go and top up their pensions, I'm guessing. It is a strange... I mean, there's lots of things that don't make sense to an outsider. I mean, why Borthwick would pick one number 8 and then not actually pick him in the starting lineup is a bit of a strange thing. But yeah, he's not had the best of tournaments. Maybe there's still some lingering doubt in Borthwick's mind about obviously what's gone on in the past, and maybe something's happened in camp. We don't know. Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I don't think it's, all careers come to an end at some point. Billy's not over the hill by any stretch of the imagination, but if he's honest with himself, will come back and won't be impressed with what's gone on there. I mentioned the player that was picked ahead of him, though, at number 8. And quite frankly, for me, Ben Earl is player of the tournament.
how long have we been saying, not only in this podcast, but a lot of people in England have been saying, to be fair, why isn't Ben Earl getting more caps? We've seen what he can do at Saracens, and he's now been given a chance to do it. And what a surprise, not. He's just gone and done exactly the same for England as he gives us week in, week out.
Absolutely, 100%. And, for me, everybody's going to pick Ardie Surveyor as the number 8 in the World Cup team. Ben may well get in at open side in a lot of people's cups, although I think the Argentinian lad Kramer gets the open side for me. But Ben should be the number 8 in the World Team of the Year. I think he has just been spectacularly good. And the interesting thing is I also see him taking on an awful lot of leadership as well. And I think Steve Borthwick will recognise that in Ben Earl. And I see him being a future England captain in 3 or 4 years' time, perhaps after the next World Cup, because we'll get on to another player that I pick in my World 15 of the World Cup. At number 10, the best 10 in the competition has been Owen Farrell. And people will laugh at me, people will ridicule me, people will shout at me for being an idiot. But Owen Farrell, when he played 10, was imperious. Came back against Chile. Okay, it's Chile. I'd fancy myself at standoff against Chile, but he did pretty damn well there. Coming back after a 4-week ban for his red card, took him 10 minutes, and then England looks like they could have ripped Chile apart and did at will. He then reverted back to 12 for the Samoa game, and George Ford had an absolute nightmare outside a pack that was going backwards. Ford comes off, Farrell goes into 10. We win a game that we could easily have lost. Against Fiji, he was man of the match. And against South Africa, England had won. He'd have been man of the match in that game as well. And then against Argentina, I thought, Argentina, I've already said he was running on fumes by the end of that game. He's not as young as he should be. But, he's only 31. He's got another World Cup in him. If Johnny Sexton can go to a World Cup and play at 38, then Owen's got another World Cup in him.
We've discussed Owen Farrell's chances of playing for England ad infinitum on this podcast, and I'm sure people are almost to the point of either agreeing with us or fed up listening to us talking about it. But yeah, I mean, he would be starting at 10 for me in England's side every week. How you then get Smith and Stewart into the same side, or do you look at one of them? Do you perhaps put Smith on the bench and bring him on for Farrell and try and change a game later on after Farrell's giving you the control? But then Farrell's game seems to fit the current England game plan, if you like. If we wanted to play a more expansive open game, then you would probably pick Smith, but then you can't change it halfway through a match or possibly even halfway through a tournament, because you can't just bring on another set of players with a totally different mindset. It's tricky going forward. There's a lot of questions that Borthwick's going to have to ask himself. I hope he doesn't go down the route of just trying to shoehorn people into positions where they sort of can get away with it rather than actually where their best position is. Picking Smith at 15 doesn't seem to be a very good omen on that one myself, but we'll see.
Well, Marcus Smith, I think, has impressed me in this tournament, not necessarily through his play, but through his commitment. And I've said this on many occasions, Marcus Smith has the potential to be a very, very good player, or Danny Cipriani Mark II. And he's not being a Cipriani. He's knuckled down and he's played for the team. He's put his body on the line, to be fair to him, and that's all you can ask. And I mean, he might be a bit of a saloon door, but he's a saloon door with a bit of resistance now, as opposed to just opening up at will. I still think that Marcus Smith's best role as England would be facilitating a 7-1 split on the bench if we ever wanted to do what South Africa did last night. Because he could cover 9, 10, 11, 12, 14 and 15 if you needed him to. Not a problem there. But yeah, you're absolutely right. But I mentioned Jamie George. Jamie George isn't the Jamie George he was 4 years ago. But still, you look how much rugby he actually played. And again, in that third, fourth playoff, he started on the bench, but when you needed that bit of control, when Theo had slightly gone off the ball a little bit, brilliant to bring Jamie George on. And Theo Dan is learning so much from Jamie George.
Absolutely. I mean, Theo Dan certainly for Saracens is going to be the future. He's versatile. He's got good darts. He's a good hooker, and he's a good all-round forward player as well, and very good in the loose. When he gets the ball, he can certainly put his head down and run with it, and he can play he's almost a like for like replacement for Jamie at his pomp. And as you say, he's not yet at the end of the career, but he's certainly not getting any younger, as none of us are, in fairness. Theo Dan will be, I hope, will be the future, certainly for Saracens and probably for England. I'd also put in another name, although they did struggle on Friday night, as we've already said. Formerly of this parish, Jack Singleton, I think will go on and get more England caps, hopefully, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Hooker is the one position where you'd be more concerned going forward for the future. But I think Jamie George hanging around and bringing on the likes of Theo and Jack Singleton and Jack Walker as well and whatever, I think, he's a right role model, certainly better than another previous England hooker who shall remain nameless at this point in time. But, I just think he's the right thing. Other players, Saracens, I mean, Max Maidens is at Bristol now, obviously, but he's been picked on. He's won since the Saracens last year. He's obviously wee-weed on somebody's cornflakes, I think.
Yeah, as I said earlier, we don't know what's going on in camp, but it does seem a bit strange. The whole England lineup has evolved. I don't know. Is that the right word? It's certainly changed. I mean, you had Alex Mitchell, who wasn't even in the squad, was being picked at the end, and same thing with Johnny May, of course, who wasn't in the original squad, and then found himself as a nailed on starter. So there's certainly some odd stuff going on in there. We've ended up with an England side that's done pretty well, but Max will be well rested, and I'm sure Bristol are looking forward to seeing him back at Ashton Gate.
Yeah. Now, two other players to mention on a Saracens basis from England. Elliot Daly, I don't think he had a bad tournament. Didn't have a fantastic tournament, but against South Africa, he was excellent and put Cheslin Colby in his pocket. So he had a really good performance there. Another one who perhaps is a little bit cursed by the fact that he can play a lot of different positions and never seems to nail one down. But a player who really did impress me, and indeed is one half of my second row in my team of the tournament. But yeah, Maro Itoje was back to somewhere very, very near, if not at his very, very best this whole tournament.
Yeah, it's been great to see Mauro come back. Maybe there was something in this injury or illness that he picked up and had been playing with for a while. We obviously don't know what that was, but he did certainly seem back to his best in that. But he's a big game player. He always has been. He's always one of those players that's always stood up in the big games and put in a statement performance, and he's done that again for England. And I think he's probably answered a lot of his critics, hopefully, this tournament.
Oh, well, indeed. I think what is also developed from this tournament as well is, you remember the last tournament, he was partnered a lot of the time with either Joe Launchbury or George Cruz. He was very much the junior second row in that dynamic. This time out, he is, and he's got the likes of George Martin, David Ribbons, Ollie Chesham playing next to him. He is the senior second row. Not only the senior second row, but he's one of the senior forwards. And because of that, he's taken on that responsibility. He calls the line-outs. He sets the standards. He sets the levels for the whole pack. And the pack, to their credit, have followed him, and Courtney Laws as well, who had a fine tournament. And I think the older players, and I'll also include Joe Marler and Dan Cole in this, the older players have created a platform where the younger players have been able to come in and find their feet in big knockout competition rugby. Yeah,
obviously, the more leaders you have on the field, official or unofficial, the better you're going to be. And he's got he's got a decent blend there. He's got one or two decisions to make, Borthwick, going forward. One or two questions to answer about who he replaces retiring players with and how he shuffles people around. But the future's not quite as bleak for England as it might have appeared 6 months ago.
Well, unless you're Andy Goody, this morning has tweeted to Raz Erasmus, if you're leaving South Africa, could you come and lead England? And I started thinking, Andy Good, what a plonky you are. Anyway.
In fairness, he tweeted that last night, so he may have been raiding the cellar by the time he tweeted that, because I saw it just after the game last night. So he was probably a few points in. But yes, it does seem a slightly strange call. Unless he's asked himself the question, how can I possibly make England even less popular amongst opposition fans than they are now?
Indeed, absolutely. Look, hey, Barry, thank you ever so much for your time. Again, fantastic chat there. We probably used up most of our months allotted stuff. We're back again, though, on the 8th of November with another edition of the Fezcast. All it remains for me to say is thank you very much to Emma Taylor, which was fantastic, and thank you, Barry, for sitting here and letting me rant on about things in world rugby, and obviously celebrating a couple of good wins for Saracens as well on the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a decent weekend for us as Saracens. So let's get back to the Premiership now. We won't get everyone back next week for the game against Tigers, but let's see if we can sneak one or two in, and let's crack on with our season now that the French Jamboree is over. And thanks everyone for listening.
Absolutely. Cheers, folks. All the best.
This is the Fezcast.